Do I need to? I'd be glad to go into it. Does the state have any opposition to the motion itself?
Well, the motion speaks for itself, and I've read it, Judge. It involves Friday. Well, I guess really both of us were notified sort of at the same time. Someone from the media had let us know that somebody had contacted them, said that they had some information they thought should be brought to our attention, involved a gentleman by the name of Ronald Mustard. We went and had investigators interview him. We turned over the recording to the defense. It involved an incident a number of years ago where Mr. Colley assaulted him with a firearm in response to some things that were going on with a female. The defense, we had actually were planning to subpoena Mr. Mustard because we thought that he could be used for impeachment of one of the defense's witnesses, which was on their witness list. The defense advised us that they were not going to call that witness, and so we decided not to subpoena Mr. Mustard at that point. We did provide the information to our doctors. One of the, and it's something else that we wanted to, I think, readdress this morning. With regard to the defense, one of the motions that they filed previously about some of the prior incidents of threats and violence involving the defendant, information had been provided to the doctors, and the doctors considered in reaching their opinions in this particular case. And that is, again, as Ms. Dunton was arguing with regard to the last motion, the defense has put at issue in this case that the defendant's actions on August the 27th, 2015, incidents were more indicative of what exactly took place, what were the real reasons that the defendant did what he did on August the 27th of 2015. To that extent, because the doctors have reviewed that information, they've considered that information in reaching their opinions in this particular case. That's kind of how it would come up.
Am I correct in concluding, and correct me if I'm not correct, that you don't intend to elicit from your doctors the specific instances of misconduct? I'll characterize what Mr. Mustard said in his email as misconduct by the defendant. Am I correct in assuming you don't intend to elicit the specific acts of misconduct for your experts?
Well, we will follow whatever guidance the court gives. We don't necessarily have to. Obviously, I think that the experts would reference those incidents as incidents of violence. One involved an incident where the defendant was arrested in Orlando and assaulted some people, including police officers. Another one was an incident that happened in his neighborhood with his neighbor, some threats of violence there. Obviously, the injunction itself, where he threatened to kill the victim in this case, threatened to kill her dog, burned her clothes, and then I think there's probably, and then the Mr. Mustard incident. I mean, I think the experts would refer to all of those as incidents of violence or threats of violence. But we will follow whatever guidance the court gives and limitations that it puts. But this is information they did consider and that they did rely on in reaching their opinions.
I don't necessarily have an issue with the experts talking generally that there were instances of violence or misconduct, but to go into specifics, I do have an issue with that, especially something that was disclosed so late. But give me 1 second. Mr. Gray, will you advise the jury, I know they're in our room right here, that would just be a couple minutes and we'll have them out here, so let's not say anything while we've got the room.
It's just going to be a couple more minutes.
Grouped up in that small room. All right, Mr. Wood, anything further?
Yes, Judge. Under 90.404, this is bad character testimony. I think the court alluded to getting into specifics. I don't even know how you could even bring this up in a general sense, but obviously this is, you know, the credibility of this witness is in our opinion, not there. There's no police report on this. And as Mr. Johnson mentioned, I mean, we got this information, you know, 5 days ago after the, you know, media thoroughly had covered this case. So we would, and there's nothing, and this overflows into the other specifics that I'll follow up on in a minute with regard to the other motion in limine that, I think it's the third motion in limine. there's nothing tying this incident to the specific impairment defense and presentation that the defense has elicited, that on August 27th, that the defendant had taken Ambien, which was the primary contributor to his impairment on that morning and during the events in question, and we've been very specific about that. And Mr. Colley was not even, prescribed Ambien in 2001. There's nothing that directly relates or is relevant about what Mr. Mustard says, and so to even for these witnesses, to these experts, to get into prior violent acts even in a general nature, including this particular instance, is unduly prejudicial to the defendant.
The defense has somewhat opened the door to general references. The defense put some experts on the stand, and I guess you'll do that again, that the incident that took place was the result of this cocktail of drugs. The state is countering that, or attempting to counter that, saying no, it wasn't a result of the cocktail of drugs and that mitigation shouldn't apply because there have been some prior instances in the past. So the experts, yes, will opine that it was not the result of the cocktail of drugs, but it was a result of just the way he is, for lack of a better term. And I'm speculating as to what their testimony would be, but I see heads nodding, so I guess I'm speculating correctly. So I do think the door's been open to some degree. I'm not going to permit the experts to testify about the specific prior instances of misconduct, but I'll allow them to speak generally about that, to say there have been prior instances of violence or misconduct, such as to indicate that this incident on August 27 was not the result of the drug cocktail. So I'll grant the sixth motion in limine in part, as it applies specifically to Mr. Mustard and the things that Mr. Mustard said in that email and the statement to the state, but it's denied as to generalities. That makes sense. I hope everybody understands.
Yes, sir.
And just, Judge, before we get to the jury, let me also make sure the record is clear that, because what you just announced affects the, or deals with, let me just double check, I think it's the third motion in limine, which was in response to the state's amended notice of rebuttal testimony. Yes, here it is.
Those were specific instances.
Those were specific.
With the Orange County one, I'm going off of memory.
Yes, sir.
There was
The incident in the neighborhood.
There were three, I apologize. Something about kicking a dog. Or got mad at a neighbor because the neighbor kicked the dog. And then there were two others.
The injunction, the petition, and one that I forgot about, I was trying to remember, was there was a text message to his girlfriend about a road rage incident that he texted her and told her about that happened in front of his kids, and that wasn't another one.
Yes, and we appreciate you bringing that up too, because that was a concern as well too. There was text messages going back and forth between Mr. Colley and Amy Mason back on August the 21st of 2015. There was no police report, there was no arrest, nothing further than that. And Mr. Colley, and I can share this with the court, in his clinical evaluations had denied that incident ever took place, that he was basically using bravado language to his girlfriend. So I think if I understand the court, so we're all on the same page, that your decision would be inclusive of all those matters that I addressed in the third motion in limine and the state's amended notice of rebuttal testimony. Am I correct on that?
Right, again, I don't want the specifics, but the expert can testify to generality, so it covers that as well.
Okay, I just want to make sure that so that the witnesses are advised of that as well too.
Okay.
One of them is in the courtroom this morning, so but we'll go over that with him.
He is so advised that he was able to hear us up here, but just remind him of that.
Yes, sir. And if I could just say, well, I know you've ruled, Judge, and we thank you for your ruling, but if I could just say one thing for the record, because I'm sure that, as with all things, this will be an appeal issue. Mm-hmm. Mr. Wood had made an argument about notice with regard to the Mr. Mustard incident. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to state for the record that both the state and the defense received that information essentially at the same time. That information included a phone number for Mr. Mustard, We were able to make contact with him, get a recorded interview, which was provided immediately to the defense. As I understand, the defense also had made contact with Mr. Mustard to speak to him about the incident. I don't know the results of that contact. I believe also they had made contact with the girl who was involved in the incident, I guess to talk about, you know, her knowledge and awareness of the incident, to get her take on that. And so there was, I think, ample opportunity. I mean, obviously, we didn't sit on the information. It was disclosed to us Friday.
I'm not making that accusation. So we both got the information at the same time.
I think the argument is that the defense did have an opportunity to vet the information, even though it was disclosed when it was. So.
And let me just say this. In the event the door is open to it, I don't expect it will be, but in the event the door is somehow opened into getting into that, I will just state for the record under the Richardson decision that there has been no discovery violation. All right.
Okay.
Anything else we need to take up?
I can't think of it right now.
All right.
Thank you, Judge.
Bring the jury in. You ready to proceed this morning, Mr. Ward? In the courtroom. I hope everybody had a good evening. Now everybody gets settled in. I apologize for the brief delay. We had you cooped up in our jury room over there. A couple of things I need to pick up before we get started this morning. Let me start off this morning. Same question I ask you every morning, but I do need to ask you that. Has anybody seen or ever heard any media accounts of this case overnight? Everybody shaking their head. No, thank you. I appreciate that, folks. I know you're probably tired of me asking you that after a couple of weeks now, but nonetheless, I do need to ask you that. And we are running right on schedule. Actually, we're running ahead of schedule. So I'll be able to update you later today as to what the plan is for the rest of the week on this plan, how we move along today. We are ready to proceed. If you may recall from yesterday, we were in the middle of the defense case in this phase of the trial, and that's what we're going to pick up this morning. Mr. Wood, you can call your next witness.
Thank you. Dr. Daniel Buffington.
Dr. Buffington, if you'll take the witness stand right over here and remain standing when you get there, so the clerk and then should give you good morning.
Yes, sir.
Do you solemnly swear affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, Dr. Buffington. You can be seated. Mr. Wood, when you're ready, you can inquire.
Thank you. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning, sir.
Would you be so kind as to introduce yourself to the jury, please?
Yes, my name is Dr. Daniel Buffington. I'm from Tampa, Florida. I'm on faculty with the University of South Florida's Colleges of Medicine and Pharmacy, and have a specialty practice called Clinical Pharmacology Services.
And how long have you been a clinical pharmacologist?
Since 1987.
All right. And if you could share with the jury your educational background.
Yes, sir. So I did my undergraduate training at the University of South Florida in Tampa in biology and biochemistry. I was next attended the University of South Florida, the Mercer University in Atlanta, completed a Doctor of Pharmacy or a PharmD program, and subsequent to that did a postgraduate residency and clinical pharmacology fellowship at Emory University, also in Atlanta, and then following that did a MBA with a healthcare focus, also from Mercer.
Okay. And do you hold any licenses in your current occupation?
Yes, sir. I'm licensed as a pharmacist in the state of Florida and Georgia.
And do you also are you also involved in a corporation, a business enterprise, as a clinical pharmacologist?
Yes, I have a private practice in Tampa with fellow colleagues, and it's also a postgraduate training. We take graduate students, physicians, nurses, PharmDs on clinical rotations. I also have residents and fellows in training as well.
So you see live patients then?
Yes, I have a clinic in North Tampa located adjacent to the University of South Florida campus. There we have patients who are referred by primary care, by specialists, by health systems, by their insurers, self-referred patients who have found us. And the service, the clinical consultation service, is focused on identifying through a formal review of an individual's past medical and past medication history any areas for improvement, any potential drug interactions, any drug metabolism concerns. I also serve as a principal investigator in clinical research trials, typically medications that are like 3 to 5 years before their FDA review and approval, and also serve as a consultant on healthcare, both service model and delivery, as well as measurement of quality outcomes for hospitals, government agencies, like that.
Would the federal government also be one of the government agencies you
Yes,
refer to?
for the last 5 years, I've served on the healthcare reform team within Medicare, focused on medication safety and medication management.
Now, you mentioned you teach at University of South Florida. Is that in the field of pharmacology?
It is. So the College of Medicine, I've taught there since the early 90s, and been full-time faculty, clinical faculty based on practice activities and variety, still on faculty. College of Pharmacy has only graduated its 3rd class, so it's a relatively new program around the country. So I'm also on faculty with the College of Pharmacy.
And have you had occasions, well, first of all, let me ask you this. What is a pharmacologist? What does that mean?
Pharmacologist is a specialist in medications, not simply in the data surrounding them, but how best to apply. So medication selection, looking for patients who are at risk for various conditions, looking at opportunities for drug interactions. So clinically managing medication therapy. So if you looked at oncology or rheumatology or psychiatry and saw those as specialties, this would be a specialty role in helping to manage medications appropriately and safely.
So in your field, in your expertise, you consult with medical doctors on appropriate care of regarding medications for the patient?
Yes, so it could be a primary care office, a generalist, could be a specialty office of any specialty. It could also be from a medical examiner. We take toxicology questions from medical examiners who are looking at post-mortem review after a death and trying to identify if there was a medication or adverse side effect or combination of drugs that may have contributed to the death.
Have you previously provided expert opinion testimony in prior court cases?
Yes, sir. Numerous since the early 90s.
And would that be in state court as well as federal court?
That's correct.
All right. And do you recall roughly the last time you provided in court expert testimony?
Last month.
Okay. Do you remember where that was at?
Hillsborough.
For the record, that's in the state of Florida?
Yes, Tampa.
Okay. Do you remember if that was a state or federal case?
Federal.
Have you testified as an expert in criminal cases?
Yes, numerous. So in those cases, it could be looking at the evidence, evaluating the pharmacologic substances, could be validating the effects medications have on an individual, wide variety.
Okay. And do you also, or have you tendered or rendered expert opinion testimony in civil cases?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And have you been retained to provide expert testimony or consultation on behalf of prosecutors before?
Yes, both state and federal.
Okay. On more than one occasion?
Yes.
Okay. And likewise, have you also tendered or consulted as an expert in pharmacology on behalf of defense clients?
Yes, sir, both state and federal.
Okay. Now, how did you become involved in this case?
I was originally contacted by Mr. Schumacher regarding questions surrounding what implication or role of medications, both prescription, illicit, and over-the-counter, may have played with regards to behavior or mental status for Mr. Colley around the time of the event.
Okay. And do you remember roughly when that would have been, when you were initially contacted?
I think somewhere in February of 2018.
Now, did you receive any records, documents in this case?
Yes, sir.
All right. And I'll just kind of run through a few categories for you or with you. Did you receive, for example, Mr. Colley's medical records?
Yes, sir.
And did you receive Mr. Colley's pharmacy records?
Yes, for both publics and secrets.
And did you also receive what we would generally call police reports, witness statements, other such documents?
Yes, sir. Numerous.
Okay. And did you also have an occasion to meet with Mr. Colley?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And do you recall roughly when that would have been?
That was on April 5th of 2018.
And would that have been at the jail?
Yes, across the street.
Okay. And what was the purpose of meeting with Mr. Colley?
Well, in reviewing medical records, it's often important to find more details or granularity behind what you see in either a progress note or a pharmacy printout report. A printout report shows you what was dispensed. It's really, you're going to get the information from the person, what they took, the pattern that they used, what types of effects are positive or negative that they were achieving from those medications.
Okay. Now, let's focus for now on the pharmacy records of Mr. Colley. Did you review those records as part of your process and ability to give opinion testimony in this case?
Yes, sir, I did.
All right. And did you likewise consider what Mr. Colley reported to you and the information you gathered from him as part of your review of this case and testifying in opinions in this case?
Yes, looking at them in totality.
Now, let's go through the medications according to the records in using the August 2015 time frame. Can you tell the jury what medications had been prescribed for Mr. Colley during that period of time?
Give me the start date again.
In August of 2015. Incident in this case is August 27th.
Yes, sir. So the records went significantly prior to that and were important to reveal and giving.
Sure. And let me, I appreciate that, because let me kind of, I guess, let me put it to you this way. Prior to, say, August 10th of 2015, was Mr. Colley, and I'll just kind of break it up, was Mr. Colley prescribed any antidepressant medication?
Yes, he had.
And what was that medication?
Wellbutrin, or bupropion. Wellbutrin is the brand name.
Okay. And was Mr. Colley prior to that, prior to August 10th, at some point in time, did Mr. Colley get prescribed any medication for sleep disorder?
Yes.
All right. And was that in August of 2015?
That is correct. August 10th of 2015.
Okay. And what sleep disorder medication was he prescribed?
He was prescribed Zolpidem or Ambien. Zolpidem is a generic, Ambien is the brand name.
And referring to August the 10th, was there, according to his medical records, his pharmacy records, was there any change in his antidepressant medication as it relates to Wellbutrin?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury about that?
So Wellbutrin had been added previously, but it was discontinued on 8/10 at that same appointment. It was originally prescribed in June of that same year.
2015?
That's correct. So he took that in sequence and went from one to the other. And at that point, the Wellbutrin would still have had an effect, even though it was discontinued. And that's a process by which the body responds to medications. And we can explain that in detail.
Okay. Now, Also, using August 10th as a reference date, by that time had Mr. Colley also been prescribed and was taking certain pain or anti-inflammatory medications?
Numerous. He had a lower back injury, L4, L5, which is very common just around the waist of the L1. And he was taking opiates, so a medication called Norco, which is a combination of hydrocodone and acetaminophen. He was taking meloxicam or Mobic. Mobic is the brand name. And he had previously been taking Flexeril, which is a muscle relaxer.
Okay. Any other medication with regard to pain or anti-inflammatory medication?
Yes, he was also taking non-steroidal products, which would have included naproxen.
Okay. Is that, and trust me, this is a layman asking the question, what is that particular medication designed for? Is it for pain or inflammation or?
Well, it's for inflammation, but it assists with lower levels of pain management that are caused by inflammation.
Okay.
So many orthopedic conditions or neuromuscular conditions trigger inflammation, either at the site or even distant around the body. So a non-steroidal, even though you may see it as an over-the-counter medication, has very specific effects as well.
Now, in referencing the time frame of August of 2015, was Mr. Colley taking any, for lack of a better phrase, nutritional supplements of any kind?
Yes, there were numerous. He was actively trying to get his cholesterol and triglycerides in order, trying to get back in shape and lose weight. There were multiple medications over the counter that contain what I'll call herbal or natural supplements, but when we look at medications, we have to address those as well because they can have adverse side effects on their own. They can also be contributory with others, with other medications. The three products that he reported taking were LipoRush, Liporush, that's a metabolism stimulant, so it would be, even though it's natural products, its effects are like a stimulant medication. There's multiple products in it. The other is Tonic Hangover, Toniiq, and the same thing, that's got some natural products. That's actually an extract of mushrooms that helps to balance glucose levels. So that's another area that he was struggling with, is trying to keep his blood glucose, his sugars in order. And he also took Tonalin Sensor, Tonalincensor. And that too is a counter natural supplement that has multiple medications in it that also can help to stimulate metabolism.
All right, and so in the course of your profession, your work experience, your research, are you familiar, let's take it by group, are you familiar with the Zolpidem or the Ambien, as it's called? Are you familiar with that drug?
Very much so.
Okay. And have you had occasions to do research on that drug, its adverse side effects from any source?
Yes, research in the sense of studying the different publications, medical literature, surveillance data that the FDA manages, and even a medication that's been approved and on the market still has a requirement to turn in surveillance data for adverse side effects, and we track that nationally. Have I done clinical trials on the medication? No. But I've done an inordinate amount of research for clinical purposes and for policy development.
And your sources of information, your literature, the other sources that you relied upon in reviewing this case and the Ambien drug in particular, are those sources relied upon in your field of expertise?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And all right, so let's talk about, and then we'll go through the different medications. Let's start with Ambien. And according to the literature, your research into Ambien, what are the known adverse side effects?
Well, one of the key is sedation. So it sounds ironic, but you take the medication to assist with sleep, but individuals can be sedated the next morning as well. So you expect to use it as a tool to assist with insomnia. So somebody who has a difficulty. You don't take the medication and you fall out. It's not a medication that, like an anesthetic agent that you take and you just, in 10 or 15 minutes, you're out, you're unconscious. So it is a medication that patients may use, and then even if they are taking the medication, still have problems with sedation. We don't all metabolize Zolpidem at the same rate. Some people are much slower, and we typically see that very quickly after someone has started taking it, is that they're having extended periods of sedation or side effects. So they could have problems with drowsiness, dizziness, diarrhea, amnesia, hallucinations, confusion. One of the most concerning is something you've probably heard on the news, and the FDA requires now the manufacturers, there's about 4 products in that category, requires manufacturers to publicly notice that we've all seen direct-to-consumer advertising, but this is a key issue, that because a parasomnia can occur, a parasomnia occurs while you're sleeping. So a parasomnia is where an individual who falls asleep, and we all go through REM cycles, so you can track it on your phone now, you can see patterns. Those are important for restoration. So when we say restorative sleep, it's important for all of our health, and you need those REM cycles. What happens with a parasomnia is on the way back up in one of those curve shapes, you get stuck, you get locked. And a parasomnia is typically behaviors that the individual knows. Something that you don't wake up and speak Spanish if you've never learned Spanish before, but you may get up, get out of bed, walk around the house. So sleep talking, sleep walking. But the ramifications, now that we have medication like this and its other 3 agents, we now see far more prevalent. So it could be sleep driving, sleep shopping, sleep sex. So there's a wide variety of behaviors that if you only wanted to let logic apply, you would say, well, that can't happen. You have to be awake to do that, to carry on a conversation, to make a decision, to make a meal, to prepare something, to leave the house and get behind the wheel. So some of these individuals may look like they're alcohol impaired, that kind of intoxication, and others may do sleep-related, complex sleep-related behaviors and resolve back at some point. So the typical factor with that is that at the end of a parasomnia, it's typically in someone who's had sleepwalk or sleep-talking problems prior in life with that behavior. It's magnified or enhanced by alcohol. It's magnified or enhanced by exhaustion. And it's typically, it's characteristically, as I said before, something you've done before. So it's a behavior that's common to you or known to you, so that when you're in that stuck phase, you're not fully awake yet. You may look awake, but you're not out and you're not done with the sleep cycle. And during that, it's perplexing that an individual can do complex activities.
The adverse side effects, the instances that you relate to the jury here today, has that been documented in the research you reviewed?
Numerous. And there's also Zolpidem as a category of medications also has an association with violence. So it's not the most prevalent, but it's the problem if you're in that percentage of people who have it. So it's been associated with violent and aggressive behavior as well. So it's associated with that medication.
Okay. And this research and the adverse side effects that you relate to the jury, has this been documented over a period of time according to your review of the literature?
Yes, and as I stated before, to the degree that the FDA requires the disclosure of that information to the public before a person even started out there.
All right. And I know we'll get into a little specifics here shortly, but the dosage that Mr. Colley was prescribed for the Ambien in this case, what was that dosage?
So it was either it's 10 milligrams, and it was written as either a half tab or 2 half tabs, a whole tab, daily at night.
Okay.
And you would logically want to take that at the time you go to bed. You wouldn't want to take that if you're only going to have a short window to sleep.
Right. Would it be advisable, for example, to take an Ambien and then go drive a car?
No, as I stated, it's not going to knock you out like an anesthetic agent. But if you're drowsy already, it's going to make you drowsier.
Okay. So let's talk about the first the Wellbutrin that he was taking as of August the, I think you said 8th of 2015. What, according to the research and the literature and your expert review, first of all, are you familiar with that medication in your practice?
Yes, sir, with all of the drugs in this case.
Okay. And Wellbutrin itself, does it have, lack of a better phrase, certain uses that it would be prescribed for? Is it just an antidepressant, or?
No, sir, it has multiple potential clinical uses or applications.
Okay.
So antidepressant is one of the most common, but it also affects the nicotine receptors in the body and has been useful over the years. It has a component of treatment of nicotine addiction. So if you're trying to quit smoking, quit dipping, cigars, whatever the case is, it's able to help curb that craving and to actually help somebody get through tapering off of nicotine.
Okay. So we know from the records and your review of the records that in August of 2015, Mr. Colley was then switched off of the Wellbutrin, went to Cymbalta. You're familiar, as you said before, with that drug as well, correct?
Yes, sir. He had been on the Wellbutrin for approximately 60 days.
Okay.
So when you look at those medications, that's a short window to discern the therapeutic effect based on how the medications work.
Okay. So you're talking about the therapeutic effect of Wellbutrin?
That's correct. So it had been on from mid-June to mid-August. And in that time, he was then abruptly changed to another medication. So you didn't see the full effect of the Wellbutrin. And in these types of medications, you want to allow 2 to 3 months or more to see the full effect, but you also want to taper so that you don't need these medications that work on chemicals in the brain called neurotransmitters. And we all make neurotransmitters. It's how we adjust our moods, our cognitive, our attention, our thinking skills, all actions in the body. And when we treat depression, when we treat anxiety, when we treat insomnia, when we treat pain, actually all of those, anything that's neurocognitive, we're artificially adjusting, like a dial on a dashboard, what that medication will adjust on various one or more. Many medications affect 2 or more neurotransmitters at a time. So what I see here is very rapid fluctuations between therapies, which is not advisable.
Okay. Does what are the first of all, what are the adverse side effects with regard to Wellbutrin?
So Wellbutrin, again, an antidepressant, so it could be, you could see sedation, you could see insomnia. It can actually cause insomnia. You can also see abnormal sensations to pain or reactions to pain thresholds, anxiety, tremor, sweating, anorexia. So it's not without its problems.
Okay. And this has been documented in the literature for some time?
Yes, it's included in the packages or what the manufacturer releases on the package.
Okay. And how about Cymbalta? What are the adverse side effects different or more or the same for Cymbalta as Wellbutrin?
If you put them in tiers, Cymbalta is going to be well above. So if we're going on the rungs on the ladder, Cymbalta is a much more potent antidepressant. It also affects multiple neurotransmitters. And it also carries with a higher incidence of adverse side effects. Its generic name is duloxetine, and the brand name is Cymbalta.
Okay. So would the adverse side effects be the same as they are for Wellbutrin?
Some, and then others magnified. The physiological effects with it too.
What would be some of the physiological effects of?
Changes in blood pressure, changes in heart rate, sweating.
Okay.
Nausea.
All right. And so the Cymbalta then, is it I think you may have just said it, but it's a more powerful drug than Wellbutrin?
Yes,
okay.
On all accounts, both its positive sides as well as its adverse side effect profile.
Okay. All right. And so let's also talk about the pain medications that Mr. Colley was on, starting with, well, let's talk about the oxycodone, I believe you said he was prescribed?
Right, that was in June. and then he was vacillated with hydrocodone with acetaminophen, and was getting different dosages. But that's also not uncommon in that if a medication is used for chronic pain, we try to encourage the person to use less on days they don't need it because of what we see with opiate. I call it opiate burden. The general exposure to an opiate brings with it its own problems. It of course brings powerful pain relief, but along with that comes the risk for confusion and for unstable gait. So patients on opiates have higher incidence of fall rates and other types of problems.
Okay. And the Mobic that he was also prescribed, what are the adverse side effects to Mobic?
It is a very potent anti-inflammatory agent. It's called naloxone, and its side effects include pain, headache, dizziness, falling, dyspepsia or difficulty digesting, so you get indigestion, significant indigestion, diarrhea, nausea, constipation, flu-like symptoms. Okay. If it's doing the job, that's great. If it's producing these side effects, we pull back.
And again, these are well documented in the research?
Yes, all these that I presented are from the published, FDA's published manufacturer guidelines.
Okay. And then, let me ask you this, in August, using August 10th, 2015 as a time frame, what specific pain medication was he taking at that time?
At that point, it was the anti-inflammatories, including the Mobic and the Naproxen, and the Norco, which is the hydrocodone and acetaminophen combination.
Now, are there any known side effects to the Naproxen?
Yes, numerous. Like the Mobic as an anti-inflammatory, its most notorious is gastrointestinal discomfort to the degree of even bleeding ulcers. So we have to monitor, and that's why you see a maximum amount of what you should take over the counter, especially if you have risk for bleeding and prior ulcers. But also headache, discomfort, confusion. You may look at a product like that and say, well, wait a minute, it's an anti-inflammatory for a strain or a sprain or mild acute injury. But even with that, if you go to the manufacturer's literature, if you go to our clinical research data, it too has the capacity for cognitive complications as well. It's not in its highest category, but they're there as well, and well documented.
Okay. And was Mr. Colley also prescribed what is commonly called Flexeril?
Yes, but to the best of my knowledge and review, that would have been prior, and I don't know that he was taking that on the day.
Great. All right, so did you have, excuse me. Let's go to the nutritional supplements.
Yes, sir.
I just want to kind of briefly mention those. What according to the literature, the research you conducted, what are the known side effects of those supplements?
So for the lipo rush, it can cause heart palpitations, stroke, mental status changes, depression, irritability, and it's got about 5 different medications or active ingredients in it. They each have their own list, but all have similar types of capacity to alter your cognitive function as well.
And the other supplements as well?
The tonic hangover prevention, that's Lynchy or Ganoderma, and that's the product I was telling you is actually derived from mushrooms. It's an Asian mushroom. It helps to sustain blood glucose levels, but if you drop those too low, you end up with confusion and mental status changes as well, just like if you're diabetic and you misregulate or get out of sync with your blood glucose levels. It can also cause headache, dizziness, bleeding, and skin reactions. And then the last is tonalin sensor, and it can cause interference with platelets, your actual blood products that help to sustain coagulation, keep you from bleeding out. So it can alter your platelet function. It's also hepatotoxic, that means it's toxic to your liver. It can also, it's been, flaxseed oil is associated with unstable gait and seizures. So it can actually alter your seizure threshold. any of us have a potential for a seizure if we maintain the proper electrolyte and electric balance in the brain. A seizure is when that threshold is breached and you actually have erratic electrical impulse to the brain. So it's also associated with seizures.
Now, we mentioned earlier that you had the opportunity to talk to Mr. Colley and your clinical evaluation of him at the jail. During that process, did you also go through Mr. Colley's narration of the events of the early morning hours of, well, actually late evening of August 26, 2015, following through the morning of August 27, 2015, on through the date or at the time of the shooting on that same day?
Yes, sir.
All right. If you could tell the jury what Mr. Colley relayed to you in terms of that time frame and the chronology of events as you gathered from Mr. Colley.
Starting with the evening prior.
Yes.
Yes. So he had been home with his son, his children, and parents, and his sister, celebrating one of his son's birthdays, and had tried to reach out to his wife. And as the kids went to bed, a friend of his, I think by the name of Daryl, reached out later in the evening and invited him to go out. So since the kids were with the grandparents and family. And when they went out, they went to 2 different clubs, and he did acknowledge that he drank Crown Royal. I think it was 2 to 3 drinks while out. Based on the time frame, it appeared to be between the time they went out and pre-midnight. After midnight, there was a time where either finishing one of those and someone Daryl knew had access to what they thought was cocaine. There's really no way to validate what substance when you take something like that. So it was a powder substance that Daryl acquired, and Mr. Colley said that he took a line as well. I inquired as to what was previous substance abuse patterns, and he was predominantly alcohol. That was his substance abuse.
Actually, before you go further, let me kind of rope that in a little bit too. Mr. Colley's reporting to you of his alcohol intake might be important before we go further in the chronology. Did he report having issues with alcohol consumption? When I say issues, I'm talking about abuse of any kind of alcohol consumption.
In the past?
Yes.
Definitely. That evening, no. He said it was 2 to 3 drinks from the time they got there till shortly after midnight. And before the friends, before Daryl found that he were acquiring cooking.
Okay. Did Mr. Colley report to you of past instances where we in the lay people would call a binge drinking pattern? Did he relate that to you at all?
Yes, in the past.
Okay. All right. So, did Mr. Colley relate to you any, dependency issues regarding cocaine?
No, in fact, the opposite. He said it was something that, if he looked back historically, he'd only ever tried a couple of times. Okay. And on that evening, did not have. I remember distinctly said he hoped it would help him sharpen up for the time that he would drive home. Remembering that cocaine is not one of those substances that people typically take and get high. It's something that people take and get enhanced. So you feel that you're stronger, more awake, smarter, all that sense of being. So he said at that time, he thought, well, I'll do this because it might help me sharpen up for driving home. But he stated that he didn't have any discernible, noticeable effect. And that comes back and is important because we don't really know what that was. It's not uncommon that substances are sold under the pretense that it's something, or you think it's going to be a particular effect, and it's been cut so many times that there's almost no pharmacologic exposure as well. So. Okay. But that was the extent of that. That would have been somewhere after midnight and before the time that he departed to go, which was somewhere in the 3:30 range.
Okay. Using that then as a reference point in the chronology, did he report where he went to after the 3:30-ish?
Yes, he stated that he was on his way home to his sister's house, Rhonda's, and that because he had reached out to Amanda prior in the evening to try to get her in touch with the son and say happy birthday or good night or something, and that she had stated that she was sick, he went by, because I guess it was close proximity, even not in a direct path, it was within an exit or two. So he went by to check on her and went to her home.
And did he report that he went into the home?
He did.
And did what?
Well, he said he had the access to the house with the garage door opener and other things, and he went in to find her and didn't find her there at all. Well, I guess her car wasn't there either. And that upon finding things of a sexual nature present there that he did not associate with her or him, he became concerned with what did that mean, with confirming or validating that there was someone else involved. And he did say that he destroyed some TVs that were his and made a mess.
Okay. And then, according to Mr. Colley, what happened after he left the residence?
That he left there, and I don't know whether it was directly across the street or within a few doors, a neighbor's close friend's house, Michael. Now this would have been early in the morning, so somewhere in the late 3s, 4 o'clock a.m. range. And talked to him and vented and relaxed or chilled with him and had a beer then. But to the best of my knowledge, per his statement and Michael's, it was one that offered to him at the house.
Okay. And at some point he left Michael's residence?
That's correct. He knew he had an appointment the next day in court, so he went from there back to Rhonda's house and wanted to go to bed, so he went ahead and took his Ambien and went to bed.
Just for the record, I know the jury understands, for the record, Rhonda's house is where he was staying at the time?
Correct.
Okay.
My understanding is he had moved in there, and when they would share custody with the kids, that's where the kids would come to.
I see. So he goes back to Rhonda's house, then what happens when he goes to Rhonda's house?
Took the Ambien, so if you take the instructions literally, take when you go to bed, that would be when he went to bed that night.
Do you recall what amount he reported that he consumed at that point?
2.
Okay.
But unsure whether it was 2 halves or 2 full tablets.
So he takes the Ambien, and then what happens?
Went to sleep and says that he was in such a deep sleep that his father had to physically wake him up the next morning because I guess the kids were running late on getting to school. So his father took his car because it had the car seats and everything in it, which left Mr. Colley having to use his sister's car to go to court that morning.
Okay.
So he got up and got prepared. His father took the kids to school.
And so then he went to court?
Yes.
Okay. And then did he report at some point leaving court?
The next thing I remember is he said he can remember being in the parking lot with his father.
Okay.
So there was some discussion or post-court, so I guess after the father dropped the kids off, he came to the court. But he didn't have a fluid memory of the events. So that becomes important.
So, and I just want to kind of freeze frame it there. So Mr. Colley is now reporting some issues with regard to memory of specific chronology up to going to court or what happened in court, if you could relay that to the jury.
Correct. So my understanding is it wasn't just his, it was other people's observations as well. Apparently he ran over to the mailbox trying to leave the house that morning, and that was observed and seen by others. So what he described was he could recall being in the courtroom, that he could recall being in the parking lot. So one of the problems with parasomnia is intoxication in general. So I think it's important to realize that we're not proposing, I'm not stating based on my review, that it was intoxication like alcohol. Like he had so much of a single drug that he reached a intoxication threshold and was intoxicated like that. What we're looking at here is do the medications prescription over the counter have the capacity when combined to have instances of abnormal psychiatric status and behaviors? And the answer is yes. So in this type of review, I didn't see him act. None of the experts in this case had the benefit of seeing or evaluating him as it was one of their patients in the time. So we're all looking back at records. So what I'm looking back for is is there evidence strewn across that night, that morning, that day, that is consistent with what we can see with the medication? So can I say 100% emphatically? No. But I'm saying that there is consistency with what transpired with the types of adverse side effects that you would see from these together.
Okay. So moving forward then, Mr. Colley does report leaving court. What's Mr. Colley then, in his narrative to you, then reporting what he recalls happening after that?
Can remember being at Rhonda's house, and I don't know whether he was cognizant of the amount of time he had to get ready. He did have work later, scheduled to work that day. And then from there, remembers a conversation with Amanda that was
Would that have been over the phone, just so we're clear
Yes.
on the record? Okay.
So, stating that he was apologizing and wanted to come by and reconcile over the TVs that he had damaged.
All right. And then what does Mr. Colley say then happened?
He was then at her house. He doesn't remember parking, but it was behind the house. He remembers being in the backyard, coming in from the backyard, and seeing the back of the house, seeing the back of the house, and seeing in the back doors or window, and seeing individuals in there, including what appeared to be a man.
Okay. And then what happened?
He says he remembers going back towards the car, not getting in the car, not going into the trunk, which becomes imperative in this discussion. The weapons that the family had hid from him to keep away were in that trunk. So he happened to have the car, the vehicle that had those weapons in it. The next thing he remembers not going and getting them, preparing them, doing it, was standing in the backyard and firing at the glass.
All right.
And then going into the house.
And what does he say then happened after that?
He just remembers walking through, like strolling through, and firing.
Okay. Does he have, is he reporting complete recollection of what happened inside the house?
Yeah, we refer to it as snapshot memory. So if you can remember the old-time movies, which are picture after picture after picture, and you go through it with a turnstile, it's more like that, or it's like flipping through an album, where you see one picture and then you see the next. You don't have the cognition or comprehension of what was flowing, so it's not a fluid memory. And that's very characteristic of both parasomnias and intoxication.
Regarding the actual shootings of Miss Colley, Mrs. Colley, Amanda Colley, and Lindy Dobbins, what did he report to you about those events?
He does not remember shooting anyone.
Okay.
Shooting the gun, yes, but not pointing at someone.
All right. And does Mr. Colley then report leaving the house at some point?
Yes.
All right. And then what happens according to Mr. Colley?
The next thing I remember him describing was being in the driveway and talking to his father and an uncle. I think it's an uncle William. And the father giving him money and referencing go to the relatives. And I think they're in the state of West Virginia.
Okay. Does he recall in his narrative any part of the trip to ultimately Virginia?
I don't recall if he knew anything fluid, but he would have to remember something because he remembers seeing beer can between his legs while driving. And there's also apparently video at a gas station or Jiffy Mart of some sort where he was seen purchasing close to the home, close to Rhonda's home. But he has no recollection of that.
Okay. So let's kind of go back a little bit to the medication, and I'll kind of follow through with some additional questions. We know, according to the records, he's prescribed Cymbalta August, I think you said 10th of 2015.
Correct. By Dr. Sanchez.
By Dr. Sanchez. By the way, is there any issues about him getting these prescriptions from a licensed doctor, or that they weren't in fact prescribed for him? Any issues about that at all?
No. The cocaine, obviously,
Right.
but or whatever that substance was.
Sure. But as far as the prescription medications, those were all lawfully prescribed to him as far as your records and review?
Yes, and those products that were over the counter are legally sold in the United States as well.
Okay. So we know, using obviously the data of the homicides, are August the 27th of 2015, some 17 days after the switch, 18 days to switch from Wellbutrin to Cymbalta. First of all, let me kind of break that up a little bit. Would that short of a time frame, or that time frame with regard to the consumption of Cymbalta, by the time August 27th came to pass, would, in your opinion, Cymbalta have been reaching its full therapeutic effect at that point? It's about 2.5 weeks after it's prescribed.
So it's an interesting choice of words to have in the question. Once you put it in your system, it's having therapeutic effect.
Sure.
Is it having the full desired from an antidepressant? No. That takes, when we take a medication for anxiety, for depression, for psychoses, that takes, as you're changing the level of neurotransmitters, or the activity, or the response to the neurotransmitters that drug affects, it takes upwards of 2 to 3 months to see the full desired therapeutic effect, meaning anti-anxiety, anti-depression, and so on. So no, that was a very short, but this is a dilemma in psychiatric care, is that unfortunately, before patients are fully at the desired window to see if this medication that's been selected is having its desired role, we often see patients experiencing the adverse side effects, and in many cases, independently discontinuing. So it's not uncommon, and it's a clinical challenge to keep patients compliant through the adverse side effects. So it's having a pharmacologic effect day 1, 2, and 3. Is it having the full desired, I use the term equilibration. So if you think of disruption and gyrations, the settling and the equilibration of the neurotransmitter to the effect of that new medication. But I bring this up to say, to help explain, is that when I'm teaching this to physicians, pharmacists, nurses, it's also equally important to understand that when you take the prior drug away, it had an adjustment period as well. So when we discontinue a therapy, if we're not tapering it, the body and the brain is having the same disruption. The term I use is a neurotransmitter storm. You're having an abrupt, where's that medication now that I was used to having to keep that daily balance? The daily balance for your morning, your full day activities, your sleep, all of those are affected. So you've got the discontinuation of the Wellbutrin. So he's not on it anymore. He's not taking a pill. It's still having a several week period where the body wasn't acclimated to it. And now you've got Cymbalta. So if you put it in kitchen terms, this is a mixing bowl. We've now stirred things together, and it's going to take a period of time to equilibrate to see what effect that's going to be, positive or the negatives.
What are neurotransmitters?
So neurotransmitters are chemicals that are made in the brain. Think of the brain as several pieces of spaghetti that just run end to end. They all interconnect in these giant webs. In between the tip of the noodle to the next noodle is a chemical, a bath of chemicals that are either released by the one end or by the opposing end. And those, whether it's norepinephrine, whether it's dopamine, whether it's serotonin, there's many, acetylcholine, there's probably 10 majors and there's probably 50 minors. And those chemicals absolutely dictate how we behave, how we think, our judgment, how we perform. So when we add a medication in, we're waiting to see what level of disruption we caused, and if we got to it. It's not a perfect science. So psychiatry is very much an art and a skill over time of seeing the effects of medications and how best to manage those patients.
Is it unusual then for changes in either medication or dosages with antidepressants to occur with patients?
Oh, absolutely. The FDA even requires the pharmaceutical manufacturers to produce educational materials and instructional materials for prescribers, for nursing who are going to manage, for families. With antidepressants, with the sleep aid medications, it's imperative that you not only counsel the patient, because if you think about it, the adverse event may be experienced by them, seen by someone else. So educating caregivers, family and caregivers about those as well. And that includes abnormal thoughts, abnormal judgment, change in mood, violence, aggression, all of it.
Okay. So then now turning towards the Ambien medication and your review of the documents in this case, have you had the opportunity to review certain voicemail recordings and text messages from Mr. Colley to Mrs. Colley in the time frame of August 26, August 27, 2015?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, kind of in the morning of August the 27th, Mr. Colley calls, texts Mrs. Colley and relays certain things to her and back and forth, using, say, like the 7 o'clock kind of time frame. You had previously told the jury that Mr. Colley reported taking the Ambien around 5 o'clock in the morning or so, and then his father waking up a few hours later. But you do see where Mr. Colley communicated in some fashion, at least according to the text message or records, to Mrs. Colley in a certain specific way. How do you explain the effects, the adverse side effects of the Ambien with regard to that ability to communicate?
So here we go. We're right at that threshold. But that looks like a behavior you had to be awake to. You had to get your phone out. You had to text. You had to build letters and words. You had to send and transmit. You had to wait and see for a response. And there was a flurry. And that flurry I didn't see. If I go back, I've got a copy of it here. I thought it went back prior into the 5s and 6s. That's exactly what I'm talking about. For someone who gets up and makes a meal, for someone who gets up and shops online, they had to get up, turn the computer on, go to a website, log in, do a purchase, but they were asleep. This is totally consistent with the parasomnia. What does Mr. Colley remember of that window? Nothing. How do you have, it's a complex sleep-related behavior. Do you remember the criteria that I told you before? 1, somebody who has a history of sleepwalk, sleep talk. He does. 2, alcohol enhances or magnifies the risk. He had had a beer within the hour and a half prior to taking that Ambien. What was stated? What was texted? I'm not sure if the jury's read it. It was not pretty.
And
So-
would that also, did you also consider the fact that later in the morning, both before and after court, again, Mr. Colley is relaying or communicating to Mrs. Colley certain things?
In a very different tone or tenor. So the other thing is, would there be any reason that he would be in a parasomnia expressing frustration or anger at her in the middle of a divorce?
So, also, I guess the ability to drive. So, in your research and your review of the literature and your awareness of Ambien adverse side effects, can someone be impaired with Ambien and still drive the vehicle?
Absolutely. And again, I'm not stating that he has no recollection. He was able to tell me visual that are consistent with a place or a time. None of it was fluid. So there's not one parasomnia. But what's consistent is it's things you would do that otherwise you think they must have been awake. They had to do. To walk, to navigate, to turn the key, to drive, to talk to people, to make decisions. So in any of these other parasomnia events, people are making decisions, talking, walking. So it's perplexing to look at someone and go, well, I'm not saying they're intoxicated like 3 times the legal limit on alcohol, but it's a behavior that is medication related. And when you add the others in, he's got an array of things that are contributing to that. So I'm not disregarding the scenario. I'm trying to factor all of them in totality and saying, is it consistent with what these medications can do as adverse side effects and what transpired that morning?
So, doctor, do you have in your expertise and your review of the research of the medications, in particular the Ambien, and your other review of Mr. Colley's discussions with you, the totality of the information before you, do you have an opinion as to whether or not Mr. Colley was substantially impaired from the ingestion of his prescribed Ambien primarily and secondarily the other medications to the ability that he was substantially impaired at the time of the homicides in this case.
Yes, based on what he was prescribed, taking, the sequence of events that night, that morning, the appearance of the presentation, the lack of memory, the abnormality of the actions, yes, it would be consistent with these adverse side effects.
I don't have any other questions for you.
Cross-examination.
Your Honor, I hate to break, Mr. Colley would like to use the restroom if possible.
We all have to take a break at this point. But we'll go ahead and take a 20-minute break. It's 10 minutes after 10, so I'm going to go to the second floor lounge. Take a 20-minute break until the coffee's ready. Again, please don't discuss it with anybody else during the break. Don't do any research of any type. There is another jury trial going on, so you may be crossing other jurors in the lounge, so please don't talk about your cases. They're getting the same instruction as well. And leave your notes here in the courtroom. As soon as we're ready, we'll get everybody back up here. So 10:30, be ready to come back. they are. And they are here. So we can go ahead and bring the jury.
Judge, before we do, I just want to, we're on the record.
We are, yes.
Okay. I wanted to make sure that, and I don't know if this will be a question for cross-examination. I want to make sure that Dr. Buffington heard the court's ruling with regard to specific acts of prior violence. That I want to make sure that that's understood, that the state won't be asking for specific prior violent acts. And
More important, the state heard it than the witness heard it, because the state's going to be the one asking the question.
Correct. I just don't want there to be an issue with this particular witness. We've already added it to the states, so they're going to notify their witnesses, but I don't know how it's going to be asked on cross-examination. I just want to make sure that that's not an issue.
I don't anticipate any issues. All right, let's go ahead and bring the jury. Everybody, want to be seated in the courtroom? We are ready to proceed with the cross-examination of Dr. Buffington. Mr. Johnson, when you're ready, you can inquire. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Dr. Buffington, I want to start, I want to just kind of go back to your evaluation of the defendant that you did here at St. Johns County Jail. Okay.
Yes, sir.
When did you say you did that again?
That was on April 4th.
Of this year?
April 5th.
Of this year, correct?
Yes, sir.
So I want to kind of walk through this step by step. And just to be clear, this is what the defendant told you. He recalled his experiences from the night of August the 26th through August the 27th, up and through the time of the murders, and then beyond that, correct?
Yes, sir. That's my recollection from the interview.
So as I understand from, and you indicated, I think early on, that it was important to speak to the defendant and to find out what his experiences were, so you can develop an opinion as to exactly what kind of effect these drugs may have had on him, correct?
Correct. Prescription drugs.
The drugs themselves the prescription bottles, the pharmacy records, the medical records, those would not have given you indication of what effect, if any of these drugs may have had on him, correct?
I don't know that I would phrase it that way. I could make great assumptions on what effects the drugs will have, but not with great granularity on what did transpire.
Okay, fair enough. So let's talk about what he told you. As I understand, and that he told you that the night before he was at home, correct?
That's correct.
And while he's at home, he attempts to make contact with his wife. During that time, she tells him that she's not feeling well, correct?
That's correct.
Then thereafter, sometime, I guess around 10 o'clock or so, and if I get any details wrong, I told you, correct me. But sometime at 10 o'clock or so, he gets contacted by his friend Daryl and invited to go out with him, correct?
Correct. I don't know whether the 2 minute is accurate.
Okay, fair enough. So he goes to meet with Daryl, and they go to a couple of bars, correct?
Correct.
And they have some drinks, correct?
That's correct.
And how many drinks did you say the defendant told you he consumed while he was with Daryl?
My recollection from the interview was 2 to 3, and they were crowd rolling.
Okay. And you indicated that he also told you that he did a line of what he believed to be cocaine, correct?
Correct. It was something acquired by Daryl from a friend that evening at the location.
Okay.
At the bar.
Is it your opinion, Dr. Buffington, that neither the drinks that he had with Daryl nor the cocaine would have had any impact on him at 10:30 or so the next morning?
They would not have induced any intoxication. So you would not expect alcohol intoxication, and you would not expect cocaine pharmacologic effect at that time. the disruption on the neurotransmitters possibly, but not intoxication.
Okay. Well, let me phrase the question a little bit differently, or maybe preface the question a little bit. Assuming that the one line he did was actually cocaine, pharmacologically speaking, and I'm not even sure that's a real word. You can correct me if it's not. But from that aspect, how long would that have had an impact on his system? How long would he have been feeling the effects from that one line of cocaine?
Yes, sir, approximately an hour and a half. So when you look at each substance, we look at when their effect starts, how long the pharmacologic effect lasts, and then we look at a whole separate series of characteristics, like how long can you detect it in blood, in urine. So the pharmacologic effects of cocaine are outwards of an hour and a half.
Okay. So hour and a half, in terms of the pharmacological effect, it would have passed, correct?
That's correct.
And then the alcohol, the 2 or 3 drinks of Crown Royal, how long would that have been in his system from a pharmacological standpoint?
Only a few hours. So if those were pre-midnight, by the time he even had the cocaine, those were diminished.
Okay. So he does the cocaine, he does the alcohol, and then he leaves Darryl around 3 a.m. Is that correct?
3 or 3:30.
Okay. And then he returns to his house where he was staying?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
My understanding is that on the way to go back to his sister's home, that he went to check on Amanda because that residence was in close proximity.
Okay. So from leaving Darryl's, he goes directly to Amanda Colley's residence, correct?
That was my understanding.
Okay. So he goes there. Did he ever tell you where he parked?
At that juncture, no. I don't recall that in the discussion.
Okay. So he goes into the home, is that correct?
That's correct.
I think you indicated that he used the clicker and went in through the garage, correct?
He still had access to it.
And he goes into the house, he's looking around, he finds the sexual paraphernalia and some items within the home, is that correct?
That's correct.
And those items that he found made him angry, correct?
I assume so. I assume it would anyone.
Well, he told you that finding those items made him angry, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so he actually told you he took those items, correct?
I don't recall if he took them from the house.
Okay. So he, after finding the items, getting angry, he then leaves and he goes to his friend Mike Dickens, who is a neighbor, correct?
That's correct. And as I stated before, I don't know whether it's one house or 2 houses, but it's in very close proximity.
Okay. He goes, and this was approximately 4 or so in the morning, is that correct?
Late 3s or 4 o'clock a.m.
Okay. He talks with Mike Dickens. He has a beer at Mike Dickens, correct?
Yes, sir.
At that particular time of the morning, would that beer how long would that beer have been in his system, having a pharmacological effect from that point forward?
Again, probably 2 to 3 hours max, and it would diminish quickly. Single beer is not even going to register you on intoxication.
Okay. So he's at Mike Dickens, and then he returns home. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then he told you that he knew that he had court the next morning, correct?
Correct.
And so he was going to try to get some sleep. And then he took the 2 Ambien and went to sleep, correct?
That is correct.
And that was at 5 o'clock in the morning?
Approximately 5.
Okay. So let me ask you some questions about that, Dr. Buffington. I think you had said early on, did you not, that, obviously the purpose of Ambien, it's a sleep aid. So it's something that you would take generally at night before you're going to go to bed, correct?
That is the instruction.
And it's also part of the instructions that you want to be sure you give yourself 8 hours of sleep time. You're going to take that medication. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So the defendant told you that he took the Ambien around 5 a.m. even though he knew that he had court at 9 a.m., which was approximately 4 hours later. Correct?
That's correct.
And then you said that he went to sleep, and then the next morning
his father had to aggressively wake him up. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did he kind of explain to you, either in words or by actions, exactly how his father aggressively woke him up?
Had to touch him or shake him.
Okay. He was laying down in the bed, asleep when his father did that?
I don't know whether it was a bed or a chair. I didn't ask that.
Okay. He didn't tell you that he was, I mean, you didn't have any information either from the defendant or from reading in the other materials that you reviewed, that he was sitting up in a chair, sleep texting while his father was shaking him awake, did you?
No, sir. That would be consistent with my concerns, sir.
Okay. So you hadn't had any information of that. So his father wakes him up, and then he gets up and he gets ready for court. Correct?
That's correct.
He has the children there. They have to get to school. So Dad takes them to school. Correct?
Yes, sir.
And then he goes to court. Is that right?
That's my understanding.
Okay. And then you said that the defendant really didn't have much memory of what occurred in court. Is that right?
Still a snapshot. He remembers being there, but not fluid memory of the entire event.
Okay. Other than being there, was there anything that he told you that he could remember about being in court?
I don't recall the detail.
Okay. Have you had a chance to watch the video and listen to the audio of him being in court?
No.
You've not listened, watched it or listened to it at all?
I don't recall the court video. I've had other audio recordings.
Okay, well then let me kind of drill down with the question specifically. Because I know that originally the audio and video were kind of separate. So the audio, have you listened to the audio of him in court?
Yes.
Okay. So in that audio, is it not the case that the defendant appeared in court and he was wearing a dress shirt and a tie and slacks and his work ID badge? Is that correct?
Yes, which would not be out of the norm.
Sure. Okay. And while he comes into court, they advise the judge what they're there for. The defendant identifies himself by name. Is that correct?
Yes, there was interaction.
Okay. And the defendant also told the judge where he worked. Correct?
Yes.
And then the judge went through a colloquy with him. Correct?
Correct.
And a part of that was one of the questions that was asked of him was, are you under the influence of any intoxicants? Correct?
Yes.
And the defendant immediately said no. Isn't that correct?
Right.
So the judge
equally concerned.
Okay. So the judge finishes the colloquy, and the judge, imposes the agreed upon sentence in this particular case, which involved probation. Correct? And a part of the conditions of that probation was that he was supposed to complete a batterers intervention program. Correct?
I think so.
To which the defendant in that court proceeding told the judge he had already signed up for, correct?
I don't remember the full dialogue.
Okay, the audio video will speak for itself, correct?
I would assume so.
Okay, so is it also true that in the course of that same conversation between the defendant and the judge, the defendant, when the judge was talking to him about what the court costs were, the defendant specifically asked the judge if he could apply his cash bond to pay for the court costs. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that was something that was completely initiated by the defendant to the court. Is that right?
Yes.
And so is it your testimony here today that during that period of time where he's having this conversation with the judge, saying I'm not under the influence of any intoxicants, and the judge is making a finding that it's freely and voluntary, his plea is freely and voluntarily made, he's engaging in this conversation about his batterers intervention program, he's initiating those conversations about having his cash bond applied to pay his court costs. It's your testimony here today that he was essentially sleep pleading?
Well, it could be. There's far more intricate things that people have done under the same parasomnia effects. But I'm looking at not just that one event, but that is explainable. But I'm looking at the totality of also the other behaviors of the day and memory impairment.
Okay. So the defendant tells you he leaves court. Is that correct?
Correct. Well, he spoke with his father in the parking lot. He remembers that like an image.
Okay. And isn't it true that the defendant's father, and this whole thing, you know, why he was in court, that was about an injunction, correct? That the defendant had against him by Amanda Colley, correct?
Again, Judge, we object to the line of question.
Overruled.
You can answer.
I don't recall the exact circumstances.
Okay. Isn't it true that that during this conversation in the parking lot or with his dad somewhere, that his dad had told him he needed to stay away from Amanda?
Correct. Which would be offensive.
Okay, and that's what the defendant told you?
Pardon?
Is that what the defendant told you?
No, you just asked me that.
Well, I mean, that his dad told him that.
I don't recall that.
You don't recall where that came from?
No.
Do you recall it being a part of what you reviewed?
No, I said it would be advisable.
No. Okay, well, let me rephrase my question. Isn't it true that the materials that you, either from your interview with the defendant or from the materials that you reviewed, that his dad told him he needed to stay away from Amanda?
I don't recall that. I do remember another discussion where that was, I think, from the house, talking to his dad on the phone.
Okay. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yeah.
Now, you provided a sort of a case summary and opinions in this case, correct?
Correct.
And I know y'all didn't go through that today during the direct examination, but here in your case chronology, on 8/27/15 at 9 o'clock, can you read that right there and let me know if that refreshes your recollection?
James Colley Sr. stated that he told J.C. after court to stay away from Amanda. I don't know whether that was in the parking lot or after court. As I just said.
Okay, all right. But it was around the 9 o'clock time frame. Okay, all right, fair enough. So he leaves court. So he leaves court and he goes home, is that correct?
Yes.
And he remembers getting home, is that right?
He remembers being there.
Okay. And he remembered also having a conversation with Amanda, is that right?
That's correct.
Over the phone, correct?
Over the cell phone.
All right. And I think you had described that the conversation, at least as the defendant told you, was he was trying to apologize and explain for busting the TVs the night before. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that was something that the defendant told you he had done. I mean, I think we talked about finding the sexual items in the home, but he also told you that while he was in the home, he got angry and busted all these TVs in the house, correct?
He did. He had recollection from the evening prior.
Okay.
Just not the morning.
Okay. So, and would you describe that as vile behavior, busting these TVs after getting angry?
It's on the outer edge of anger. Yes.
So he has this conversation with Amanda over the phone, and he decides that he's apologizing, and and then he goes to her house. Is that right?
Yes, he said he was going to bring some money by to help let her know that he would replace them.
Okay. Did he say he was going to bring money, or was he going to bring a check?
I don't know.
Okay. So he's going to pay for the TVs. Is that right?
Correct.
And so he drives to her house. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did at any point in time did he tell you that she told him, or he had information that the police were either had been to the house or were on their way to the house or anything like that?
The only thing I remember from that phrase is that before he left, so it's still while he was at home, calling her,
Okay.
is that I think he said something to the effect of, "You don't need to call the police, I'll come pay." And she said, "Well, that may be too late."
Okay. And what else did he tell you about that conversation?
I think that she said it wasn't her who called. That's it.
Okay. So the defendant told you that she wasn't the one that called the police, that it was someone else. Did the defendant tell you who it was?
I don't know that she told him who it was.
So Okay, so he gets off the phone with her after receiving this information. He decides to go to her house to give her the money, give her the check or whatever it was, correct?
Yes.
And he told you that he went and parked where?
In the street behind them, so behind their back.
Did he tell you why he didn't just drive up to the front of the house?
So that if he was going, if the police were there, he could just go on and stop.
Okay, so he was in the process of this. She had told him that the police had been called. It was already too late not to call the police. She wasn't the one that called. He decides to go over there anyway, correct?
That's what he recalled.
And of course, he had an injunction against. He wasn't supposed to be there to begin with, correct?
True.
And he knows the police have been called, so he goes over there anyway. And so he's making the decision to not go to the front of the house like you would normally do. He made the decision to go to the neighborhood behind the house. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that's what the defendant told you.
That's correct.
And he's making those decisions during this period of time, correct?
That's correct.
So he goes to this behind the house, and he tells you that what was the next thing he told you he remembered after he got there?
He remembered standing in the backyard looking at the back of the house.
Okay. And that's when he saw a man that was inside the house, correct?
People that included what he thought was important.
Okay. So, as I understand your testimony, he then remembers turning from the backyard and going back to the car. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you said something about some guns.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
What did the defendant tell you about the guns?
The next thing he remembered was standing in the backyard with one and firing at the sliding glass doors.
Okay. He told you that he got the guns from the trunk?
That is where they came from. He doesn't recall getting them.
Okay. And I believe I heard your testimony is that from your understanding of the materials you reviewed or wherever the source of information was, is that the family had put the guns in the truck to hide them from the defendant. Is that right?
That's my understanding.
Okay. So, and this was not the defendant's car. This was his sister's car, correct?
Correct. Because the grandfather to the kids had to use Mr. Colley's car to take them to school because of car seats.
Okay. So he goes back to his sister's car. It's not his car. He goes back to his sister's car and gets the guns from the trunk, although he says he doesn't remember doing that. He gets them from the trunk where the family has hid them from him. Is that correct?
That's what he's stating.
Okay. And so the next recollection he has is when he's standing in the backyard and then begins shooting into the house. Is that right?
That's correct. Into the back door.
And then he goes into the house, correct?
Remembers being in the house and firing.
But he doesn't remember seeing anyone. Doesn't remember shooting anyone. That part he doesn't remember, correct?
What I recall him saying is he doesn't remember shooting at anyone. No, I don't recall if he saw a body to the side, peripheral vision, but not finding someone and shooting.
Okay. Did he tell you whenever he was in the backyard and he saw the people in there, one of the people he thought was a man, did he tell you how he felt about that?
No.
Did you ask him that?
Yes.
What did he say?
He doesn't recall.
So he remembers shooting the gun inside the house. Is that correct?
Correct. Firing.
And then he leaves the house. Is that right?
Correct.
And then he returns home.
Yes.
And he remembers talking to his father. Is that right?
His uncle.
His uncle. You didn't testify earlier that he was talking to his father about going to his relatives in West Virginia, gave him money.
That's later. I said in the driveway of the house, he talked to his father, his uncle, and I think it's William.
Okay, my mistake. So, but he eventually gets home and does have a conversation with his father.
He doesn't recall being there.
Okay. And his father gave him money and basically told him about relatives in West Virginia, correct? And then he remembers being on the interstate, essentially heading in that direction, correct?
Correct.
Now, you had an opportunity to one of the things that you reviewed a lot of transcripts, correct?
Yes.
And in order to consider those as a part of your opinion here today, correct?
Correct, to look for things that may be relevant to.
One of those was the transcript of the defendant's father's, an interview that he gave to the police, correct?
Yes, I don't recall it verbatim. Yes.
Okay. Isn't it true, Dr. Buffington, that the defendant's dad told the police, right after all this happened, that the defendant told him during one of the conversations that he had with the defendant, "Dad, she keeps putting me in jail. I can't take it anymore. I've done what I had to do."
Judge, I object on hearsay grounds and relevance.
Sustain the objection. Sustain the objection.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the medications, the substances in this particular case.
Yes, sir.
Is it your testimony today, Dr. Buffington, that the defendant was recently prescribed the Ambien close in time to August the 27th, 2015?
Correct, that would have been on 8/10 of 2015, an appointment with Dr. Sanchez.
Okay. Isn't it true that the defendant had also been prescribed Ambien back in 2014?
I don't recall seeing that on the profile.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor? You received pharmacy records in this particular case, correct?
That's correct.
And you reviewed those in preparation to develop your opinion here today, correct?
I did.
Showing you what's titled a patient prescription record from Holiday CVS.
Correct.
You have that, sir?
Yes.
And I'll show it to you here. And these are the defendant's, these are his records concerning some medications that he was prescribed at various times by this pharmacy, is that correct?
Yes, I'm looking for the dates on each prescription. Date field to the right.
Okay. And here, the Zolpidem, that's the Ambien, correct? Here at the very bottom?
Mm-hmm.
And that was prescribed to him on December the 18th of 2014, correct?
Correct. So about 8 months prior.
So the August the 10th date was not the first time he had been prescribed Ambien?
Correct.
Did you see anything in any of the medical records or any of the records whatsoever that you reviewed that indicated from December the 18th of 2014 to August the 27th of 2015 that the defendant had any issues whatsoever with Ambien?
No, sir. Nor would you expect it. That's not the way, you don't take it. If you have a problem, it's not like you have a very Sunday every day.
But you indicated, I think, earlier that usually you talked about the equilibrium that the drugs have in your system, that usually takes a period of time for everything to equilibrate. And usually you will see, doctors have, try to counsel patients to kind of stick with the medications because generally speaking, the side effects occur early on when you begin taking the medications, correct?
No, sir. It would not be a full assumption that they're early on. It could, but they could also happen after a period of time.
Okay. But from December of 2014 to August, there's no evidence that he had any issues, any parasomnic events or anything like that with regard to the Ambien.
So based on that record, it appeared only to be a 1 month fill. So it had only been December and early January.
But still, no evidence of any issues, correct?
As I stated.
I want to ask you this, doctor. Isn't it true that the only evidence in this particular case that the defendant actually took the Ambien or the Wellbutrin or the Cymbalta or any of the other substances you mentioned, the only evidence that he actually took those substances came from the defendant himself?
Yes, just like if I was seeing a patient in an exam room or an ER, the only record you will have is from that person, logically.
But here you weren't meeting him in an exam room or an ER, correct?
No, but it was for a clinical interview.
Okay, but my question though is you weren't meeting him in an ER or an exam room, correct?
No.
You were actually meeting him in jail, is that correct?
Yes.
Where he had criminal charges against him, correct?
Yes.
Of the most serious kind, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so that's the environment that he's relaying this information to you, correct?
Obviously.
Okay, thank you for that. So in terms of him actually taking the medication as prescribed, the only evidence of that came from the defendant himself, correct?
Correct.
And the only evidence that you have that it had the effects that you've described today came from the defendant himself.
Correct. Which would be the only person who could attest to it.
And if the defendant lied to you about all those things, that would adversely affect your opinion here today, wouldn't it?
It could, yes.
Nothing further.
Can you redirect?
Yes. Doctor, let me follow up with the last couple of questions that were posed to you from Mr. Johnson. You previously provided testimony to the jury about, in your practice as a clinician, you meet with the patients, is that correct?
Absolutely.
Right. And when you're meeting with the patients face-to-face, part of that process for your evaluation and your ability to render assistance, medical or pharmacological assistance to the patient, is you have to get a history from the patient, is that correct?
Correct. And we gauge patients on their level of historical detail, consistency.
And you also have to review, look at their medical records, their pharmacy records, what they've been prescribed when they're meeting with you, correct?
To cross-reference or validate what statements they make. So if there were statements that were made that didn't support the medication dispensing or access, then there would be an issue to follow up on.
Right.
Question
Is that process necessary in order for you to give advice to the patient about whether to continue on the medications, change medication, and I include advice also to the treating physicians? Is it necessary to review the records, interview the patient in order to give them assessment and expert assistance?
I would say imperative, yes.
Okay. And that's normal in your practice?
Absolutely.
All right. Now, you did that with Mr. Colley, although you didn't see him in the ER or in your office. You saw him at the jail, but did you still find it necessary to evaluate Mr. Colley, go over his medical records, his pharmacy records, in order for you to be able to render an opinion regarding the medications and impairment issues in this case?
Yes, I still had questions that were unresolved, that if I only looked at a printed record years later, and I wasn't one of the treating practitioners, still needed to be asked and addressed to look at, did the items match? Was it consistent with what those drugs can produce? Did he have access to those medications? What was he taking at the time? What were his side effects or successes that were happening based on that collective regimen? And then look at the actions and put it into a total review.
Okay. And in this case, you did have records confirming that Mr. Colley had been prescribed Ambien in August of 2015.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any recross? No, Your Honor. Wellington excused.
Yes.
You are excused. Have a good day. What are you going next with?
Crystal Colley, right?
That's right. You were placed under oath last week, so you remain under oath.
Yes, sir.
You would remain
Thank you, Your Honor. I know you've testified earlier in this case. If you could reintroduce yourself to the jury, give us your name.
Crystal Colley, right?
And again, for the record, you are JR's sister. Okay. I don't know if this came out earlier in your testimony. Obviously, you have a sister, Rhonda, and JR is your brother. Where is JR in the pecking order of the siblings?
He's our baby brother.
Okay. And who is the oldest?
Rhonda.
Okay.
Yes, I'm the middle child.
All right. Need to do it for the record. I don't make a habit of asking someone's age. So let's start with Rhonda. How old is Rhonda?
Rhonda's 47.
All right. How old are you?
42.
All right.
And James is 38.
Okay. And, okay. So a little bit of family background. Where was James born?
Elgin, Illinois.
Okay. And obviously, you and Rhonda were in the picture at that time. Were you also born in Elgin?
I was.
Okay. How about Rhonda?
Columbus, Ohio.
Okay. And, all right. So going forward then, did there come a time when your family, you and your parents, Judy and JT, or James Colley Sr., did the family move from Elgin at some point?
We did. We moved to Orange Park, Florida in 1986, the summer of 1986.
What was your father doing for a living at that time?
Well, when we lived in Elgin, Illinois, it was a suburb of Chicago. My father owned his heating and air conditioning business, and we used to vacation here quite frequently. My mother has family that lives here, and my father always said, one day I'm going to pack up and move to Florida. And we were literally here on vacation in June, and Dad said, I'm done. I can make more money in Florida with what I do, and sold to his partner, and then moved to Orange Park, Florida, and began doing heating and air conditioning here.
I see. All right. How old would JR have been when you came in?
He was right about between 5 and 6. He would have just turned 6 the year we moved here.
Okay. So your dad is doing the heating and air conditioning business at that time for his own self? He had his own business?
When we lived in Illinois, when we moved to Florida, he actually was employed by a company that did heating and air conditioning for, there was an old bank we had back then called Barnett Bank.
I see. Yeah, everyone was okay. So when you came to Orange Park, was your mom working at the time?
Yes.
What did she do?
My mother, for many years, worked for our local florist in Orange Park, Florida.
Okay. All right. So you and JR and Rhonda go to the school in Orange Park?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember what grade JR would have been in Orange Park?
Well, I was he would have been right about first grade. He was first grade. Yeah, he had kindergarten in Illinois and then first grade in Florida.
Okay. Do you remember what school he went to?
Grove Park Elementary, we both did.
Okay. And so did the family stay in Orange Park for some period of time?
Until 1994, the year I graduated from high school. My father had gotten a promotion, actually in 93, and he moved to Ormond Beach area. And my mother stayed while my brother and I finished that school year, and my father resided with aunts and uncles while they were building a home.
So your mom and you guys stayed in Orange Park, Dad goes to Ormond Beach?
Yes.
Okay. All right, and then did there come a time when the family moved to Ormond Beach?
1994.
Okay.
June of 1994, they actually moved into their home.
I see. So does JR start going to school in Volusia County?
Yes.
All right. And about how old is he at that time?
He would have been around 12. I think he began 7th grade in Ormond. So 6th or 7th grade.
Did he eventually go to high school in Ormond?
He did.
Or in Volusia?
Yes.
Do you remember what high school?
Seabreeze?
Okay. And so by that time, by the time he's going to high school, you would have graduated from high school by
Yes,
then?
I graduated in 1994.
Okay. All right. And then obviously Rhonda sometime prior to that.
Rhonda was 88.
I see. What high school did you graduate from?
Orange Park.
Okay. Did Rhonda also graduate from Orange Park?
Yes.
Okay. So when JR is going to high school and then graduates from high school, let's talk a little bit about some employment history there. For example, did he work during high school?
I believe he was in the OJT program. I guess it's where he goes to school part of the day and then works part of the day and gets credit towards graduation for that. And when he was in high school, gosh, he had worked at Sbarro's Pizza, he worked at Home Depot, he had contract cleaning, Barnett Banks. I know friends of his own landscaping businesses, he did that on weekends. He worked at a seafood restaurant, Barnacle Bills. And that was just in Daytona until he graduated. Once he graduated, then, but yeah, he worked since he was 15 years old.
How did you do grade-wise in high school?
He was on honor roll.
Okay. And how about earlier, like grade school, elementary school, that
He
time?
always did well in school. He was held back one year, but it was because we found out he actually needed glasses. And then my parents took him out of grade school. He was in the Grove Park because they were not very happy that the fact my child's gone all year, and all of a sudden now it's the end of the year. Anyway, so then he went to a private Christian school for a year.
Per year. What grade was that in? Do you know?
He was second.
Second grade, okay.
That was his first year moving to Florida. He was held back at first.
Okay. So then after high school, your brother, does he stay in Volusia County? What happens to him then?
He stays in Volusia County for probably a year. I don't even know if it was that long. And then there wasn't really much employment as far as corporate-wise. It was touristy kind of stuff down there. So he did move in with my sister Rhonda in Jacksonville.
Okay. And at that time, was she married to Dan?
Yes.
Okay. And do they have children?
They do not.
Okay. So JR moves to Jacksonville, lives with Dan and Rhonda. Where are you at that point in time?
I was married.
Okay. And were you living in Jacksonville or?
Well, at that time, I had actually lived in Clearwater, but I had moved back, and I was actually living in the home as well. But Rhonda was on her work.
It's complicated.
Rhonda was closing down a site for her business, so she was actually in the state of Texas. And so I had just had my daughter, and I did not like anyway, so I moved back in while my husband was trying to transfer back to Jacksonville as well. So it was me, my daughter, my brother James, and Dan living in Orange Park.
Okay. So by the time when JR moves in with Rhonda and Dan, does he work during that period of time?
Yes, he worked for AT&T. I think it was Transtech or Convergys. It was either AT&T, American Transtech, or it was already converted to Convergys. But it was a telecommunications company. They did customer service for all kinds of products. Whenever there's on a product, there's an 800 number in the back. You call that number, and that's what that company did. It was service for multiple companies, multiple businesses.
Okay. And did he do that for a while?
He did that for a while he was going through a technical education program. He was going to go into computer programming.
Okay. And what then happened as far as employment?
He graduated he got his certificate for computer programming and began looking for work, especially with AT&T and Convergys, because they did have multiple opportunities, but there was nothing that was, and he just fell into this mortgage opportunity and realized, hey, I can make more money doing mortgages than I can this thing I just got a degree for.
So where did he work? Who did he work for?
Merrill Lynch was, I believe. We're all in the mortgage industry, and things change, but I'm pretty sure the first one may have been Merrill Lynch.
And still in Jacksonville?
In Jacksonville and Southside, yes.
Okay. And then following Merrill Lynch, does he work for other folks?
Yes, from Merrill Lynch, then PHH for many years, and then Chase Manhattan for many, many years, and then Citibank was the most recent.
Okay. And he was working for Citibank at the time of this incident?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know roughly about how long he had been working for Citibank?
2 years.
Okay. So would it be fair to say well, all total, how long would you say he'd been working in the mortgage finance industry?
Oh my gosh, he would have started at least 15, 16 years.
Okay. All right. So it's been pretty steady employment in that particular field.
Yes, he was always employed. The only time he was unemployed was between Chase and City, and he was under severance at that time.
I see. Was it full-time employment with all these folks?
Since he was an adult, yes, since he graduated from high school.
Okay. Do you have any idea if he was making good money, anything like that?
Yes, my brother made a very substantial income for many, many, many years.
Okay.
He owned his own home.
And that was from his work in the mortgage industry?
Yes.
I see. Okay, so, and during that, let me kind of go back a little bit in time frame, going back to like his high school years in Volusia County. Are you staying in touch with him? Are you still, how would you describe your relationship with your brother at that time?
Well, even when we lived in separate cities, there was never at least one day of a week that I didn't see my family. So I spoke to him constantly, and actually when I was first married, when he was living with Rhonda and Dan, there was a time he worked at AT&T. He came to my house. I had an apartment briefly. He came and had dinner with me every single night. He said he was going to grow feathers because I made chicken every day, but no, I'm very, very frequent. At least phone calls every day, and saw at least one time.
Okay. Was he also close to his sister?
Rhonda?
Yes.
Yes, the three of us, yes.
Okay. And so would it be fair to say the three of you have a very close relationship?
Yes.
Okay. And that's been consistent over the years?
Yes.
Okay. Every family is different, that's the reason why I asked that. During his time with his employment, any of his employers in the mortgage finance arena, were you aware of any charitable work he did for anybody?
Well, I don't recall exactly what companies, but I know he's done Habitat for Humanity. I know he did some kind of boating thing. Those are the only two I know definitely. I know there was lots of, like Chase, we did it a lot, but it was Habitat, it was constant volunteer stuff. There was mentoring, that kind of stuff, but I don't know the dates or anything, but I do know he was active in Habitat for Humanity and a dragon boat racing thing for charity.
And for the record, Habitat for Humanity is building houses for the poor?
It's building houses or rehabilitating boys and girls homes, anything to help improve the community.
Failed to mention too, did you ever work in the same business or for the same company as your brother?
Multiple times.
All right. Would that also be in the mortgage area?
Oh, I forgot, he also worked for Bank of America. I apologize. He did work for Bank of America as well.
Okay. Was that also in the mortgage finance area?
No, that was doing customer service. That was the AT&T and all that. It was that period. It was when he first located to Jacksonville. He did a customer service position with Bank of America.
So which companies did you work with your brother in?
Bank of America, that's smart. Chase, PHH, that's it.
Okay. Were you in the same department with him during this period of time?
At PHH, yes.
Okay. Was that the customer service?
No, that was loan processing.
Okay. You did the same stuff too that he was doing?
Well, he was a little, I was kind of like the entry part, but yeah, it was the same department. We did the same thing. Okay. Just different levels of it.
You mentioned the word mentoring. Did he mentor other employees at places that he worked at?
I know personally at Chase because I've been there for many years now, and my coworkers are very familiar with my brother, and they all speak of how he was always, when someone would come into that department, he was their trainer. So he would help fellow employees and help them, get to work because he was the top performer. So people would always just go to him and ask, hey, well, how can I make the bonuses you're making? So he always would reach out.
Oh, so he gets bonuses for his work?
They used to, but they changed. But yes, Chase used to pay the underwriters based on how much they were getting out, but you still had to meet a service score. And as long as you had that service score, but then you were still cranking out loans, you could make a very good living.
Okay. So who do you work for now?
Chase.
Chase. And how long have you been with them?
8 years.
So that's in the same area, mortgage?
It's mortgage, but I do mortgage fraud.
Okay. All right. Would you characterize your brother as a good employee?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. And to your knowledge, did he get favorable reviews, peer reviews, that sort of thing at his employment?
I know on multiple occasions he would always receive a high rating where he was capping out. And so he had actually been asked to take a management role because based on the level of pay he was receiving and all that, that they could only increase his pay at minimal amounts at that point. But he was always a top performer.
Okay. Let me jump to another topic. JR has kids, 2 children, Trey and Avery. Have you, how would you describe JR with regard to his upbringing and care for his children?
He was an amazing father.
Take your time.
He was a wonderful father.
And can you tell the folks on the jury what you observed to make that testimony? Judge, may I hand her a tissue with it? Sure. The sleeve is only going to last.
Thank you. He spent every day with his children. From the moment he woke up till the moment he went to bed, he spent with his children. He taught them to swim. He taught them to tie their shoes. He taught them to ride their bikes. He took them to and from school every day. He took them to and from after school activities every day. In the rain, I would get calls to come watch Avery to make sure she could watch her little brother. He did everything for his children. He was a wonderful father.
Would that be through their upbringing?
I'm sorry?
Would that be consistent through their upbringing?
Their entire lives.
Did the children seem to enjoy being around JR?
Very much.
Okay. Did your brother ever do any coaching activities?
Yes, he coached Trey for 2 years for T-ball, and then he coached flag football, and then recently he was coaching Trey's first actual football team.
Okay. How long had he been doing the coaching?
2 years.
Okay. All right. And I'm assuming there's a certain season or part of the year where that happened.
The baseball was spring, and the football was fall.
Okay.
For both years.
I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, those are volunteer coaching positions? Yes. Didn't get paid for it or anything like that. Where was the, in relation to the house on Bellagio, where did the football and baseball activities occur?
It was the neighborhood association, so it would have been less than a half a mile from their home. It was literally catty corner.
And how did your brother did he seem to enjoy doing the coaching?
Very much.
Okay. Did your brother, JR, interact with other kids in the neighborhood?
Oh, yes. They're a very close neighborhood, always outside. It's a fairly new development, so most of the children were the same age as Trey and Avery. So every time I would go over there, all the neighborhood kids were out together with my brother and Mike Dickens. They were the 2 fathers that would be out there, or Amanda would be out there with Gail. But they were very interactive out there. Then they were all right about the same age, between anywhere from newborn. I think the oldest was maybe 6 or 7, but yeah, he definitely played with all the neighborhood kids, and they were out there every day.
That included the Dickens children?
Yes, Sean and Addison.
Okay. Sean has Down syndrome.
Down syndrome.
Okay. Okay. So, and have you seen that activity with playing and interacting with the other kids in the neighborhood during the entirety of the time that JR lived in Rebuttal?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, may I say something? Even prior to him having his own children, he lived in the home in Orange Park. And unfortunately, there was a young girl that was kidnapped and found to be murdered. Jared would leave work he did not have children, but he would leave work every day and would ask for as many of us to come volunteer to help in the search for this little girl. And all the kids in the neighborhood, he would go outside, they were a little bit older, he would go outside, come over, and he'd be out there playing football with the older boys. And so, no, he's always been wonderful with neighbors and children, especially my own daughter.
So how old was JR when with the incident you just described?
That would have been probably 10 years ago, right about 10 years.
Okay.
No, because he was married, so it would have been about 9, 10 years ago.
Okay. All right, and so you have a daughter yourself?
I do, she's 16.
16. And so you interacted with her, played with her?
Since the day she was born. In fact, he drove 4 hours, he was on a date. I delivered my daughter in Clearwater, and he was living in Jacksonville, and he drove 4 hours when I was in labor to make sure he would be there to come for birth, and he spent almost every day with her.
So he's helped with her upbringing as well, too?
Yes.
Okay. Now, how is he around animals?
Wonderful. He spent $1,000 on a dog that was supposed to be a duck retrieving dog, which ended up being his best friend. And he would go get the ducks, but he never would quite bring them back. And instead of being a hunting dog, the dog slept in bed every day and lived a very happy life until we recently lost him. We used to make it a joke because he got so overweight. We would say he had a thyroid problem, but actually his cause of death was actually a thyroid problem. He was a big boy. But JR's had pets his whole life. Growing up, my mother and father, we always had indoor pets. Everything from, he had a gerbil, we've had dogs, cats, fish, turtles. We've always had pets, and they've always been indoor pets, not pets that we use for labor or keep outside in this Ford heat.
Would you say, with regard to the kids in the neighborhood, would you say he was a positive influence for the kids in the neighborhood?
Absolutely.
Okay. I want to talk about another issue. You've certainly grown up with your brother. Let's talk about alcohol. What can you tell the jury about issues, if any, that your brother has with regard to alcohol?
My brother had a tendency for many years to what I call binge drink. He didn't drink every day, but when he drank, he drank. And he didn't make very good decisions because he would not quit drinking. Once he started drinking, it would go hours and hours.
And this has been going on for a while?
For many years, yeah.
Okay. Did he ever get treatment for that?
No, he was always in denial of it.
Okay. Did you ever tell him, hey, I think you've got a problem, you need to get some help?
Yes, when he would do like an all-night thing, I was worried about him dying.
Okay. And he would not go or did not seek treatment even when you told him that?
It was always, I'm sorry, I got caught up, I was playing poker and I wasn't aware. There was always an excuse, there was always something. It was, no, I don't have a problem, I don't drink every day. He did not recognize that there was a problem.
Are there alcoholic issues in the family?
Not with anyone else besides, I'm not gonna lie, I do enjoy an adult beverage, but no one else in the family. Well, my grandparents, but they were deceased.
Right.
Well, when the alcoholism went away, James was too little.
Okay. So, and have you known your brother to use, on occasion, cocaine?
Yes.
And for how long a period of time?
I don't know when it began, but I do know that it's been for a few years.
Okay. By the way, on the alcohol issues, your brother, alcohol of choice, more in the category of beer or wine or liquor, or do you know?
Well, it kind of changed over the years. When he was younger, it was a lot of Crown Royal with some beers here and there, and then he had some health problems, and so he became a red wine drinker, and then I guess would kind of mix some Crown Royal in with that as well.
Did you ever advise your brother about getting treatment for cocaine?
No, because he always denied it.
Okay. Okay. Looking back, do you think your brother could have benefited from some treatment for the alcoholism?
Yes.
Okay. Were you aware of any issues that your brother had for depression back in 2015?
Yes.
Were you aware of any medications that he was taking for depression?
I was not until later.
Okay. All right. Okay. Do you know from your own knowledge, I know a lot's happened since 2015, but were you aware that he was going to a doctor or had prescriptions for depression?
I knew he was going to a doctor, and I knew he had received help from his primary doctor as well as counseling.
Okay. Do you know in August of 2015 if your brother was taking pain medications, that sort of thing?
Oh, yes, I do know he was on that medication.
Do you know what for? Why was he taking pain
He had
medication?
shoulder surgery.
Okay. Had he?
Oh, and ankle surgery. It was a previous ankle injury, and the titanium screws started coming out, so they would go back and so he had ankle surgery and shoulder surgery.
I see. And was that surgery like sometime before August?
It was very recent. It was within months of August.
Okay. Had your brother had back problems for a while?
Yes, it's inherited. We all have it. He was the last one to finally have back surgery.
Okay. Was he experiencing back pain for some period of time?
For years.
Judge, am I okay on time? I wanted to get into some pictures, but
Go ahead.
all right, good. May I approach the witness room? Have you had the opportunity with me recently to look at some family photographs? Is that yes for the record?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall, what those pictures depicted, what were in the pictures?
Family photos.
Okay. And are you able to, recognize what's in those pictures and whether they accurately reflect what you can describe?
Yes.
Judge, at this time, I'm going to move that Defense B be admitted into state or to Defense Exhibit 1.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
That objection will be received as Massachusetts.
Give me 1 second to make sure this works, Judge. I'm going to say some things for the record so it's identified on the record, but are you able to see the pictures?
Yes.
Okay. What for the record is image 0523? Do you recognize that picture?
I do. That is my brother and my niece and nephew.
Okay. Do you recall about how long ago or when that was?
It was days before the incident.
The day before the incident? Um, 0525? What is that?
That is my nephew Trey opening his birthday presents.
And
When would this have been?
The day before.
The incident in this case? Where would this have been at, by the way?
That's my sister Rhonda's back patio.
Okay. This picture, which would be 0526, is that the same birthday party?
That was the Sunday before at Chuck E. Cheese, and that's Trey, Avery, my mother.
Okay. And was JR there for that?
Yes.
Okay. What's being celebrated there?
Trey's birthday.
Okay. He would have turned what year? How old?
That was his 6th birthday.
Okay. And 0529?
That is Trey Avery.
Do you know about how long ago that would have been?
That would have been in school. That would have been right when they started school, right, that year.
And 0530?
That's my brother, Trey Avery, and his twin younger children.
John Schwinghammer's children?
Yes.
Would that have been at the beach?
Yes.
0533?
That's Avery.
Okay. Do you know about when this would have been?
That was the summer as well. That was probably within 2 or 3 weeks before the incident.
And where was this at?
That's Rhonda's home.
Okay. And would JR have been there at the time?
Yes.
By the way, I think it's fair to say on the record, but let me just have you answer this. JR, we all refer to JR as James Colley Jr.
We call him JR, some people call him James.
Okay. 0535, what is that?
That was 4th of July at World Golf Village, the 4th of July before the incident.
Okay. 0537, it's a collage pictures.
Trey's birthday, the day before.
Okay. 0538, again, a collage of pictures. Is that the same? Well, let me have you tell it.
That is the collage of the Sunday before the incident for Trey's birthday at Chuck E. Cheese.
How about 0, well, we got a different number. Let's read off 320, the last 3 numbers on it. What is that?
That was before JR moved to Ormond. He played for the local football association. He was maybe 12 there.
Okay. And that would have been in
Orange Park.
Okay.
Sorry.
And last 3 numbers are 340. What's that?
That is JR's high school graduation picture. Senior picture, I'm sorry. Senior picture.
From Seabreeze High School?
From Seabreeze.
Okay. And last 3 numbers, 370. What is that?
That was Trey's T-ball, and that's Trey, Avery, and JR, and that would have been, I think that's the summer before the incident.
Okay. This
Or
would have
earlier
been,
that year. I don't know, that's 15 or 14.
would JR have been doing coaching at
Both
that?
years, yes.
Okay. Would this have been at the park you described earlier?
Yes,
You know the name of it?
that's Palencia, yeah.
Okay. 380, last 3 numbers, is that the same activity?
Yes, that's probably a different game, but yeah.
Okay. And last 3 numbers, 382, when would that have been?
I think that's Trey's first day of school, first day of kindergarten, August of 2015.
Okay. He went to what kindergarten back then?
Mill Creek.
And Avery, she was not she was in?
She was in the daycare, something Weems.
402, last 3 numbers, where's that?
That was earlier 2015 summer, that was taken at Legoland.
Okay. 421?
That would have been probably 2014, that's JR in the fishing caught.
Did your brother like to fish?
Almost every day, even in the pond in the backyard.
Okay. And Marabella, you would fish in Marabella?
Yes.
You know if there's fish in Marabella?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, 422, what is that?
This was literally August of 2015. He just started coaching this team. And that's my brother and Trey.
How about 441?
That's Trey's first day of school after JR dropped Trey off. That's him and Avery at daycare.
Okay. By the way, in general, does JR take a lot of pictures of himself with the kids? Is he a
Yes.
selfie kind of?
He's a little vain, yes. He likes selfie photos, but mostly you see he includes his children.
442, last three numbers, what is that?
That, I think there was another trip to Legoland, or I'm not sure where that one is, but I know that is the summer as well of 2015.
Okay. And of course, that's JR.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's JR Trey Avery.
450, what is that?
That was one day after work in 2015. That's JR, my daughter, and Trey.
So that's Savannah there in the picture?
It is.
Fishing, it looks like.
Yeah, they were fishing after school one day. That's the same day, and that's JR and Trey.
451, okay. 460?
That's Trey's first day of kindergarten.
Okay. 461?
I think that's 2014 trip to Disney.
Trey and Avery and the
I'm
visual
sorry,
there?
yes, Trey and Avery and JR.
It's all right, we just have to make sure the court report's covered. What is 471?
This is Avery's second birthday party, and that's JR and Avery and a family friend and my mother, and that's in their home.
This is where at?
Marabella.
Okay. How about 481? Who is that on his shoulders?
That's Avery at 6 months old, and I'm not sure where that photo was taken, but it's JR and Avery.
So logo on that hat, does that have any significance with the four-leaf clover on the hat?
Notre Dame. My
And
brother is a huge Notre Dame fan.
Big Notre Dame. Has he always been a big Notre Dame?
His whole life. Well,
Never-
growing up in Illinois, college football isn't very big, and the only notorious colleges we have is Northwestern and Illini, and they really weren't worth anything. But Indiana was pretty close, though.
491?
It's JR and Trey at one of Trey's games that JR coached T-ball for.
500?
That's the same day, and that's Avery and JR at Trey's football game.
501?
That's Trey's pre-K graduation, and that's JR and Trey.
520?
That's JR, and that's my daughter, and that's in West Virginia.
And 521?
That's Trey, and that's JR, and that's leaving one of his first games.
How old would Trey then?
5.
Is that the same, by the way, that's the same ballpark that's in the neighborhood?
That's Valencia. He played football near Mill Creek. I may have mixed that up earlier. T-ball was in Valencia, and football was over at the Mill Creek Elementary.
I see. So Trey that would be Trey playing T-ball then?
Yes.
Okay. All right, and 530?
That was summer of 2015, and that's Legoland, and that's JR Trey and Avery.
540?
That would have been probably 89.
Who is that?
That's my sister Rhonda and JR.
Okay. And do you know where this was taken at?
That's in my parents' home in Orange Park.
And how about 560?
That is in Cincinnati. We had gone to a Reds game, and that's my brother James and my father, JT.
I see. The gentleman with the big C on his hat, that's your father?
Yes, that's my dad.
And I understand he's not doing it like your father, is that correct?
No, he's not.
570, what is that?
This would have been the day before, I'm sorry, I believe it was 2 days before. This is JR and Avery getting treated for lice.
Do you know where this was at?
That was at the lice facility place.
050?
That was the summer of 2014. That was Trey and Avery's combined birthday party. And that's JR on the blow-up slide.
051?
That would have been 2013, maybe? 14? But that's at the Jacksonville Zoo, and that's Trey, JR, and Avery.
How about 060?
This was at a cousin's 80th birthday party at Bowl America. And that's our friend Tammy, that's Trey, that's my daughter in a straight shirt, and that's JR.
And Bowl America is where?
Jacksonville.
Did your brother like to bowl?
Yeah, he did like to bowl. My father was a huge bowler, so we kind of got stuck into doing it quite often.
About 090?
That's the same day. That's Avery's birthday party.
Mm-hmm.
That's Avery and JR.
Oh, okay.
And that's in the Mirabella home.
All right. 091?
This would have been around in the late 80s, and that's my parents' old kitchen in Orange Park, and that's my mother, and that's JR.
Okay. For the record, your mother is Judy Colley?
Correct.
And 100?
This is Easter Sunday, and this is when Rhonda and Dan actually owned the home in Orange Park at this time. And that's Savannah in the front, and that's my mother in the pink, myself, JR, Rhonda, and my dad.
And this would have been about how long ago?
That was probably 8 years ago? No, 9 years ago. It would have been about 9 years ago.
Let me ask you on another topic with regard to your mother. When you were younger, when you were a child, when JR was a child, did you ever, was there ever a time when your mom acted violently towards your dad in the presence of JR?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
There was a time my father had been having a marital affair, and my mother was called and informed that he had been having an affair, and he was not home, and JR and I were home, and she told me to take JR and go into his bedroom, and then I saw her sitting on the stairs with a baseball bat, and then I heard my dad's truck pull up, and I came out. And as my dad was walking in, I turned to JR, told him to go back in the room, as my mom began hitting my father with the baseball bat.
And JR was out in the living room when your mom still had the baseball?
There was a hallway, and he was behind me. It was me, my mother, directly in front of us, and my father.
Okay. And did you see your mom hit your dad?
I did.
Okay. More than one time?
There were several times to where JR...
More than one time, more than one... That one incident, did your mom hit your dad more than one time?
Yes.
How would JR have been at that time?
I was 14, so he would have been around 9.
Okay. And this was where?
In Orange Park Hall.
Orange Park. Was there ever any other time when JR would have witnessed any violent acts by your mom on your dad?
Well, during that same time period, during that same week, my mother had left, and we stayed home, and we stayed in the home with my father. It happened to be Thanksgiving, and my mom came to the house to see us for Thanksgiving, and her and my father got into another confrontation. My dad wasn't going to let her come into the home, and my mother grabbed a knife and told my dad that she was coming in the home.
And JR was at the house at the time?
Yes.
All right. And do you know if he would have witnessed what had happened?
Yes, we were all, yes.
Okay. So this is within a week of the baseball bat incident?
4 or 5 days, yes.
Okay. And what did your mom do with the knife?
I really don't remember the details of it.
Okay.
I just know that police were called to the home and Mom was removed voluntarily. There was no incident report filed or anything like that. I assume, I've actually forgotten about this incident altogether until recently, but no, Mom was removed from the home, and I believe she filed for divorce, and then they were able to reconcile, and then she came back home.
Okay. And again, the second incident is also in Orange Park as well?
Yes.
Either time, the baseball incident, the knife incident, was she ever arrested during that period of time?
No.
Okay. All right. Just want to make sure. Oh, I forgot to ask you on a positive bit of information. Was your brother active in race car driving?
Yes, him and my father. That was something they did for several years together and spent lots of money and time doing.
Okay. From how old was JR when he first started involved?
Oh, he got into racing in high school. Him and Dad started buying muscle cars and like I'm working on that, and then it just progressed to where it got into like a actual racing bracket thing where they would have cars that were not street legal but made for racing, and that was all the way up for years. Actually, I apologize, it was not all the way up. James had stopped racing probably a year before the incident.
Okay, so back maybe in 2014 he stopped doing the race car stuff? But he had his own car, his own race car?
Yes, yes.
And he would keep it up, do the work on it, that sort of thing?
Yes, he was on the TV show Pigs. He would Fun Ford weekends. They traveled all over, not just Florida, other states and racing brackets. He's won multiple sponsorships and car shows, all the muscle car shows at like World Golf Village, things like that. Him and my father participated in for years.
Would you describe JR's relationship with his father as close?
They were best friends.
Okay. And did your father enjoy being involved in the race car?
My father was involved in everything that had to do with us kids. My father went to every T-ball game on Saturdays, even though it was a 2-hour drive. My father was involved when the kids were sick, so that Jared didn't miss work because he was retired. He was involved in racing. My father was involved in every.
And despite the information of the prior issues with your mother, does JR have a close relationship with his mother?
Very, yes.
Okay. Your mother and father, I don't know if you ever mentioned this before, is your mother and father still married?
49 years. My mom feeds him, diapers him, does everything for him.
Okay. And, okay. I don't have anything else. Thank you.
Do you have much on cross-examination?
Yeah, just
okay,
one.
let's go ahead and proceed.
Still good morning, Ms. Wright.
Good morning.
Just want to talk about one of the issues Mr. Wood went through with you. Mr. Wood just asked you if you'd ever seen violence towards your dad from your mom, and you indicated yes, correct? And are these just the 2 incidences that you recall?
That's the only ones I was ever witness to, yes.
Okay. And those instances, the first one you indicated was this one where you saw her take a baseball bat to your dad?
Yes.
Okay. And how old were you?
14.
Okay. And JR, I think you said he was 9?
He's about 9. We're between 4 and 5 years apart.
Okay. And you saw that, did that happen outside the house on the porch area or something?
No, it happened as soon as you come in the doorway, the steps, as soon as you come in, steps go up, and there's a hallway right here. It happened directly for the hallway.
Okay. And you said she hit him several times with a baseball bat?
Yes.
And both of you witnessed that?
Yes.
Okay. And then close in time to that, I guess she left the house after that?
She left to go stay with a friend for a few days.
Okay. And then you said she came back And there was something about a knife, but can you kind of tell us what you
Well, it was
remember about that?
Thanksgiving, so we had a whole Thanksgiving spread on the table, and the formal dining room was directly in front of that hallway. You would come in the front door, there was a formal dining to the right, steps went up, and then the kitchen was in there, and then that hallway was here. And she had come in the front door, and Dad was telling her, "You're not coming in. You're not coming left. You're not coming back." And my mother said, "Oh, I'm seeing my children for Thanksgiving," and then grabbed a knife off the table.
Okay. And what did she do with that knife? Threaten?
She just threatened him.
Threaten him. Okay. And you guys, you all witnessed that?
Yes,
The defendant yourself,
yes.
Rhonda, other family members?
I don't think Rhonda was in there during that time. I don't even know if she was at the house yet at that time. Rhonda had already moved out of the home.
And Ms. Wright, do you previously recall testifying that you've never seen a physical fight between your parents?
I do not recall that. I'm not saying that, but I do not recall being asked that before now.
And do you recall when you gave a deposition in this case?
About 2 years ago?
Right. In 2016, does that sound right?
Yes, ma'am.
Myself was present. I believe Mr. Shoemaker was present. You recall that?
Yes.
Okay. And just as you were today, you were placed under oath during that deposition and asked a lot of questions about your family and the incident, correct?
I recall, yes.
May I approach you?
You may.
And just to be fair to you, if you would, for the record, we're on page 30. Read to yourself lines, there's a question on line 3 and on line 4 is your
Okay.
answer. Just read it to yourself and then I'll ask you if that refreshes your recollection. All right. And you were asked in that deposition if you've ever seen a fight, either verbal or physical, and your response was, "I've never seen a physical," correct?
Correct.
But now here today, you've told us about 2 physical, correct?
Correct.
At that time, in that deposition as well, you were asked if you'd ever seen your mother specifically hit your father, and your answer was that you had never witnessed that. Do you remember that?
Yes, but I believe the questions prior to that you asking me, those 2 questions were about domestic violence, which I did not consider domestic violence to take place in my home. And you also asked me, did I see my parents fight? And I said yes.
Okay. May I approach again, Judge?
You may.
Lines 14 and 15, same page. You actually continue, just read lines 4 through 15, that's your full answer. Just read that to yourself. Yeah, just to yourself.
Yes.
Okay. And in your answer, you stated at that time, but I've never seen my father hit my mother, and I've never seen my mother hit my father. Is that correct?
Yes, because we were speaking of a different incident that I was not present for.
You say, I've never seen my mother hit my father.
In regards to that incident.
Okay, I'm not sure what incident you're talking about.
I'll read my statement if you would like me to. Because
No.
I mentioned specifically what situation I was referring to in that statement.
Okay.
And that I did not witness anything in that situation because that's what I'm happy to read it.
The question you were asked was not about a specific incident. The question I previously asked you.
And I understand what you're saying is that, but as I'm stating, what I was referring to was the incident in that statement that I refer to.
Right, which is a different incident that you didn't see.
I did not know you needed clarifying for my entire life.
Well, the question was, let me back up. I want to be fair. Earlier in that dialogue, you make a statement, they did fight, don't get me wrong. I asked the question, when you say fight, verbal or physical, and your response was, I've never seen physical. Is that correct?
Correct, and then I go in to talk about the incident. I had really at that moment forgotten about the incident before. There are literally times in my life where I've been told of multiple altercations between my parents. I have only witnessed one. And that's why I clarified the one that you were familiar with, and that's why I go into detail that I did not see any physical altercation.
Right, but today here in court, you testified as to 2.
On a 20 years earlier, yes.
Okay.
Can you reiterate?
Just one question. Crystal, is it easy talking about these issues between your parents that occurred all those years ago?
No, it's not. And this is being, from what I understand, broadcast. So now everyone I know is going to know my family. I mean, it's been bad enough, but no. So there's a lot of details in my life that haven't been brought up or reminded of until I've been told I have to get in front of a court and tell everything about my family.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can you recross and stuff?
Yeah, Your Honor.
Very well. Is Ms. Wright excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Dave, is she excused?
She is.
Right, you are excused. All right, folks, we're going to take our lunch break. Let me remind you to not discuss this case with anyone during the break. Don't do any research of any type. And to leave your notes here in the courtroom. It's 12:05, so let's plan on being back at 1:20. You'll be back in the hearing lounge at 1:20. We'll get started once we have everybody back. Enjoy your lunch.